A howling wind whipped across the Texas plains, sending snow and ice needles swirling through the darkness. Clara Whitfield, a resolute widow living miles from any neighbor, braved the roaring blizzard to fetch a stray calf, only to stumble upon an injured Comanche boy, clinging to the last threads of life. Time slowed under the raging storm as she lifted the trembling child in her arms. Little did she know that her one act of compassion would set off a chain of events impossible to stop. In a land shaped by harsh survival and uneasy treaties, Clara's kindness would test loyalties, ignite suspicions, and bring a horde of warriors to her very door. Clara Whitfield's wooden cabin stood on the sparse Texan plains, a solitary refuge cut off from the world by a fierce midwinter storm. The year was 1877, and the Panhandle region was still raw and untamed, dotted with outposts and scattered ranches. After the death of her husband, Jeremiah, Clara had refused to leave the homestead they'd carved out together. She had grown attached to its silent beauty, to the memories that seemed to inhabit every plank and stone. Night had fallen early under the leaden sky. The wind was a screaming presence outside, seeping through the cracks in the rough timber walls. Most folks in the area had fled south for the winter, or taken refuge in the nearest fort. But Clara had insisted she could weather the season on her own. She had her cattle, meager though they were, and enough firewood to last a month. She had, or so she believed, everything she needed. But she was not prepared for what the gale would toss her way that evening. It began with her stepping onto the porch in her worn boots and patched coat to look for a missing calf. Her old ranch hand, Dave Mulligan, had left for Fort Griffin 2 weeks prior to fetch supplies, and he had yet to return. Clara worried about him, but more pressing was the knowledge that every head of cattle was critical if she hoped to keep the ranch afloat. The moment she stepped outside, the wind slapped her face like a cold, relentless hand. Snow had drifted in piles as high as her waist. "Come on, old girl," she muttered to herself, tugging her scarf tighter. "We find that calf. Then we get back inside." Her lantern's flame bobbed in the wind, casting wavering shadows on the whitened world. She ventured just beyond her property line when she spotted tracks, a set of cloven hooves interspersed with something else, smaller footprints that zigzagged across the fresh snow. Her heart quickened. It was unusual to see human tracks out here, especially in the midst of a storm. Curiosity pulled her forward. She followed the footprints beyond a row of half-dead mesquite trees, her breath coming in frosty puffs. She nearly missed the shape in the snow, a pale mound that looked like some dead animal. As she drew closer, the lantern revealed a small figure curled on its side. A child. Panic flooded through Clara. The child's dark hair was tangled with frost, and a thin blanket covered a slender body drenched in blood from a wound near the ribs. She recognized him at once as native, likely Comanche. "Dear God," she breathed, dropping to her knees. The boy's eyelids fluttered, and his lips quivered, but he was still alive. She pressed her hand to his forehead, feeling the chill that threatened to extinguish his life. Clara glanced around, half expecting to see the boy's family somewhere nearby. But all she saw was the swirling white void. She had 2 choices: leave him where he lay and try to find help, or carry him back to her home. She gathered him into her arms. That single moment, lifting a wounded Comanche child in her embrace, was the tipping point that would shift the entire course of her life. Clara staggered through the snow, the weight of the child far greater than his diminutive frame suggested. The storm's fury never relented. If anything, it intensified, howling like a wounded beast. By the time she reached her cabin, she was shivering uncontrollably, her arms aching with the effort. Inside, warmth greeted her. She set the boy gently on a small cot near the fireplace, immediately stoking the flames until they danced high. With trembling hands, she lit a second lantern, flooding the room with amber light. She peeled away the soaked blanket and saw the extent of the child's injuries. A ragged gash crossed his ribs, crusted with dried blood. The child's skin was ashen, his breathing shallow. Clara had never learned advanced healing, but frontierswomen of the day were adept with basic remedies. She hurried to gather cloth, a jar of whiskey, and bandages. Her mind spun with questions. How had he been wounded? Why was he alone? Where were his kin? She spoke in soothing murmurs as she cleaned the wound with whiskey, not even sure if he understood English. The boy tensed once, whimpering in pain. She whispered a prayer under her breath, recalling how her mother used to hum a soft tune when nursing Clara's younger sister. When the bleeding was finally under control, she wrapped him in bandages. He remained unconscious or something close to it. She pressed a warm cloth to his forehead and tried to coax some broth between his lips. The cabin was still save for the crackling of the fire and the relentless wind hissing at the windows. Exhausted, Clara sank into a chair. She let her eyes wander over the child's face, sharply defined cheekbones, eyelashes that looked impossibly long. She was frightened. She knew the Comanche were fierce defenders of their territory, and more than one settler had disappeared on these plains under mysterious circumstances. If his family came looking, would they assume she had harmed him, or would they understand the mercy of a stranger? She tried to push the fear aside. A child's life was at stake. The only thing that mattered was saving him. Over the next few hours, she dozed in the chair, waking every so often to check his pulse. Wipe his brow, ensure his bandages didn't soak through with fresh blood. Each time she prayed he would survive. When the morning light crept in through the frost-kissed windows, the storm had quieted, though snow draped the landscape outside. Clara brewed coffee on the cast-iron stove. Her limbs ached and fatigue tugged at her eyes, but she busied herself with chores, taking short breaks to tend to the child. By late morning, he stirred his eyes, flickering open, revealing a pair of dark irises clouded with confusion. "It's all right," Clara said gently, trying to keep her voice calm. She gestured to herself. "Clara. Clara Whitfield." She pressed her palm to her chest. "Clara." He looked at her, blinking slowly. A frown creased his forehead as he registered her pale skin and the unfamiliar surroundings. Clara bit her lip, hoping he could understand. She pointed to his own chest tentatively. "What's your name?" He said something in Comanche. His voice strained and barely audible. It might have been his name. She leaned forward, hoping he would repeat it, but his eyes fluttered shut in exhaustion. Although they didn't speak the same language, Clara recognized the universal look of agony. She stifled a sigh and returned to the stove. A thick tension clung to the air, as though the boy's presence could invite danger. Still, she steeled herself. If she was harboring trouble, she would face it when it came. For 2 days, the child hovered between life and death. Clara fed him small spoonfuls of broth, changed his bandages, and tried to ward off infection with what remedies she had. She whispered encouraging words when he woke and cried softly in his delirium. Outside, the wind blew, and the sun set and rose. The world beyond her walls seemed distant, overshadowed by the delicate dance of survival playing out before her. On the evening of the second day, Clara heard a faint knock on her door. Startled, she glanced at the child. He was asleep, sweat beading his brow. She rose slowly, unlatched the door, and found Dave Mulligan standing there, shivering under a layer of snow. Relief flooded her. "Dave," she exclaimed, ushering him in. "I feared you might never come back." He stomped off the snow from his boots. "The path from Fort Griffin was near impassable, Miss Clara. I had to wait out the worst of it." He set down a sack of supplies by the door. "I'm glad to see you're all right." His gaze slid to the small figure on the cot. "Who's that?" Clara swallowed. "A Comanche boy. Found him wounded in the storm." His expression changed immediately to alarm, then caution. "You've got an Indian in here." He exhaled shakily, scanning the cabin as though expecting a war party to burst in. "Are you sure that's wise?" She straightened. "He's a child, Dave. Couldn't have left him to die. Ain't right or wrong I'm worried about. It's his kin. The Comanche are known to be protective of their young, especially under their chiefs, like Quanah Parker or White Wolf. They might think we're the ones who hurt him." Clara sighed. "We'll deal with that if it comes to it. For now I need your help. He's feverish, lost a lot of blood. I'm no professional healer." Dave studied her earnest expression and relented with a nod. He approached the boy, examining the bandages. "I got some laudanum in the sack," he murmured. "Might help the pain. We'll need to be sure we don't give him too much. He's small." Clara felt an immense wave of gratitude. She placed a hand on Dave's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, the two of them worked in shifts. Dave tended to the livestock and stacked more firewood while Clara stayed by the boy's side. By dawn, the fever broke, and the child slept peacefully, his face no longer ashen. Clara sank into her chair, eyelids drooping. Dave brewed strong coffee. In the corner, the boy stirred, coughing softly. Despite the language barrier, Clara's gentle presence seemed to soothe him. Occasionally he'd meet her eyes, a glimmer of gratitude flickering there. But worry gnawed at the back of her mind. If Comanche riders appeared on the horizon, how would she explain the boy's presence? More troubling was the realization that he might not be well enough to travel for a while yet. One way or another, she was caught in a precarious position between an embittered land and a proud people. On the third day, the storm had finally quieted, leaving the plains eerily still. Snow lay in smooth drifts, the morning sun shimmering across its surface. With the boy's condition stabilized, Dave ventured outside to survey the area. He wanted to see if he could find any sign of the child's kin, or perhaps evidence of what had befallen him. Clara stayed behind, stirring a pot of beans and keeping an eye on her patient. Late that afternoon, Dave returned, his face drawn and pale. He strode into the cabin without speaking and sank onto a stool by the door. Clara set aside the ladle. "Are you all right?" He blinked, then spoke in a low tone. "About 3 miles west, near the big cottonwood grove I found. Footprints, lots of them. Hoof marks, too fresh, probably no more than a day old. Looked like a group of warriors, maybe 15 or so, traveling toward the hills." Clara tensed. "Comanche?" He nodded. "Likely. Could be scouts searching for that boy, but I also found something else." He swallowed, his voice grim. "Signs of a skirmish. Blood in the snow. A few bullet casings." She felt a chill unrelated to the weather. "So he was caught in a fight." "Seems so." Dave hesitated, then shook his head. "I also saw tracks belonging to a wagon or carriage. Hard to make out. Might have been another party that clashed with them. Hard to say who was fighting whom in these parts." Clara's thoughts spun. Had the boy's family been attacked by a group of outlaws or renegade soldiers? Was that how he'd been hurt? "We have to be cautious," Dave said quietly. "If there was a fight, Tensions will be high. We might have the cavalry sniffing around soon enough, or a Comanche war party. Either way, they'll want answers. Clara tried to keep her voice steady. We're not hiding anything. We just saved this boy's life. That won't matter to men who see enemies everywhere. Dave replied. A heavy silence settled over them. The child, as if sensing their unease, stirred on the cot. Clara hurried over, noticing a new bead of sweat trickling down his temple. She pressed a hand to his forehead. His fever had crept back. Despite her bravado, fear coiled in her stomach like a snake. If the boy was found here by his people, would they show gratitude or blame? If the cavalry came, would they assume she was conspiring with the Comanche that night? As darkness swallowed the plains, Clara found herself gazing out the tiny window. The lantern behind her, reflecting a ghostly image of her face on the glass. She tried to imagine the father of the boy, some fierce war chief or a determined hunter riding through the snow to rescue his son. In her heart, Clara hoped the father would see the truth, that her actions were born of compassion, not malice. But the West was harsh, its stories stained by mistrust and betrayal. Dawn brought little solace. The day was grey, the sky laden with low pewter clouds, threatening another wave of snow. Clara stepped onto the porch, scanning the horizon with anxious eyes. She could feel the tension in the air like a string pulled taut, ready to snap. Inside, the boy grew stronger by the hour. He could sit up now, nibbling on small pieces of bread and sipping broth. He still winced when he breathed, and the bandage around his torso often needed changing, but he was alert enough to watch Clara with wide, curious eyes. Sometimes he'd speak short phrases in Comanche, pointing at objects around the cabin as though trying to make sense of them. Clara did her best to offer reassuring smiles and simple gestures. Shortly after midday, Clara heard the distant pound of hooves. Her heart lurched. She clutched her rifle, Jeremiah's old Spencer carbine, while Dave, who'd been sorting through feed in the barn, dashed inside and took position near the window. They peered outside. A lone rider approached, galloping across the snow-packed earth. As he neared, Clara recognized him. Henry Salter, an old rancher who lived several miles south and occasionally traded goods with her. He dismounted hastily, tied his horse, and rapped on the door. Dave opened it, letting in a blast of cold air. Henry Clara set aside the rifle, startled by the frantic look in his eyes. "What's wrong?" Henry's breath plumed in the chill. "I was riding up the creek checking my lines, and I spotted a band of about a dozen Comanche warriors. They were traveling north. Seemed like they were searching for someone or something. I spied them from a ridge. They're armed to the teeth." Clara exchanged a glance with Dave. "They could be looking for the boy," she murmured. Henry's gaze flickered with alarm. "What boy?" Dave sighed and quickly explained the situation, how Clara had found a wounded child and nursed him back to health. Henry pressed a hand to his weathered forehead. "Lord help us. If that boy belongs to them, they'll be wanting him back. Might not be peaceful about it." Henry chewed his lip. "Fort Concho ain't far from here, but with this weather, and all it might take a while for the cavalry to respond, if they even do. Besides, you know how them army fellas can be. They see an Indian, it's all the same to them. Could make matters worse." A thick silence fell. The boy coughed behind them, drawing Henry's attention. Clara moved protectively to block his view. "He's just a child," she repeated, her voice steady. "He was dying. I couldn't leave him." Henry huffed in resignation. "I don't blame you, Clara, but you need to watch your back. You saved one Comanche life. That might save us all, or it might doom us, depending on how his people see it. No one had the heart to speak the next thought, that if the Comanche believed the settlers had caused the boy's injury, vengeance could come swift and unrelenting. For the remainder of that day, Clara kept the boy inside, offering him warmth and gentle words. Despite the strain of her predicament, a tender spark glowed in her chest every time she saw him nibbling on bread or attempting to stand. Occasionally he'd lift his gaze to her, and in that silent connection, she felt an odd kinship. He was, after all, just a little one, caught in a vortex of violence and survival, no different from how she'd felt when she first arrived on the frontier with Jeremiah. As evening settled, Dave proposed they take turns standing guard. Henry Salter decided to stay overnight, not wanting to ride home through territory that might be crawling with Comanche scouts. The three of them rotated watch shifts by the window. Sometime after midnight, Clara jerked awake from a brief nap roused by Dave's voice in her ear. "Riders coming from the north," he whispered, breath sharp with tension. She scrambled up, threw on her coat, and crept to the window. In the moonlit distance, she saw them silhouettes against the stark plains. A dozen, maybe more, approaching with a slow, deliberate pace. Their ponies left faint trails in the snow. A flicker of torchlight glinted off spear tips and rifles. Fear thrummed in Clara's veins. She snatched her carbine. Henry clutched a shotgun. Dave loaded his revolver. The child, awakened by the commotion, stared wide-eyed, sensing the collective anxiety. "Stay here," Clara ordered, moving to the door. Henry hissed, "Don't go out there alone." But Clara's mind was firm. She couldn't greet them with weapons drawn, not if there was any chance of peace. She stepped onto the porch, her breath steaming. The night air bit her cheeks, and the sound of hooves thudded closer. The Comanche riders halted about 20 yards from the cabin. Torchlight revealed determined faces, their eyes gleaming with tension. One of them, presumably their leader, inched his horse forward. Clara's heart pounded. She held her empty hands up the muzzle of her rifle, pointed at the ground, in a show of non-aggression. "I mean no harm," she called in English then, in halting Comanche words she'd picked up over the years. "We have a boy. He was wounded. He is safe." Her voice wavered on the Comanche phrases. She wasn't sure if she pronounced them correctly, but the leader's attention sharpened. Behind him, the other warriors shifted, gripping lances and bows. The leader spoke a rapid flurry of Comanche. Clara caught the word for child PR. She nodded, repeating it. The man dismounted. 2 others followed. Slowly they stepped forward, scanning the surroundings. Clara motioned for Dave and Henry to stay inside, though she could almost feel their anxious stares from the half-open door. When the Comanche leader reached her, he towered a good head taller, clad in buckskin leggings and a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His stern gaze flicked from Clara to the cabin and back again. "I help," Clara said, placing a hand over her heart. "Boy, inside." He seemed to hesitate. Then, with a curt nod, he gestured for her to lead the way. Clara turned toward the door, her pulse hammering. If this meeting went wrong, violence could erupt in an instant. The memory of the boy's ashen face fueled her courage. She had done nothing wrong. Inside, the boy was sitting upright. At the sight of the Comanche warriors, his eyes lit with recognition and relief. The leader's stern countenance softened. He knelt by the cot, speaking gently to the boy in Comanche. A second warrior joined him, checking the bandages, tracing the dried blood with concern etched into his features. Clara stood back, arms clasped. She prayed silently that they would see she meant only kindness. After a few moments of careful inspection, the leader turned to Clara. His face was unreadable, but he offered a single nod. He said something that Clara barely understood. It sounded like Tiatukama, which might have been a name. Then he pointed to himself, uttering a different word that sounded like Nokone or Nokone band. She realized he was identifying his band or clan. Finally, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and spoke a name. Was it the child's name? She nodded vigorously, repeating it. The boy looked at her with an expression that mingled trust and wonder. The leader seemed pleased. Then he reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a small beaded bracelet. He pressed it into Clara's hand. Uncertain, she glanced at him. He nodded, gesturing that she should keep it. Her heart soared. It was a gesture of gratitude, perhaps. She tried to give him a soft smile in return, but it faltered as she remembered Dave's warning. This might just be the first group of many. After the short visit, the Comanche leader and his companions departed. They carried the boy, still too weak to travel alone, gently on a travois, hitched behind a sturdy pony. Before leaving, the leader looked at Clara one last time and spoke a few more words she did not fully understand. His tone was lacking hostility. Still, the underlying tension in the cabin didn't evaporate until the warriors vanished into the night. Henry exhaled in relief. I thought we were goners. Dave shook his head. They didn't seem angry, just worried about the boy. He turned to Clara, admiration shining in his eyes. You might have just saved a child's life and prevented bloodshed all at once. Clara clutched the beaded bracelet. In the flickering lantern light, it glimmered with blue and white patterns. She felt a strange mingling of sadness and triumph. The boy who had only lingered in her life for a handful of days was gone, carried away by those who loved him. The cabin felt suddenly empty, but the West was never done with such stories. The question remained, would that be the end of it? Or was fate preparing another trial? For the next 2 days, Clara, Dave, and Henry stayed vigilant. Henry eventually decided to return to his ranch, but not before promising to keep a watchful eye out. The weather improved slightly, and Dave took a short trip to a nearby settlement to trade. Meanwhile, Clara tried to resume her daily tasks, feeding the animals, mending clothes, sweeping the cabin's floor. The ghost of the child's presence lingered, a memory of wide eyes, full of pain and hope. On the 3rd morning after the boy's departure, Clara was outside hauling water from the well. She heard an urgent holler from Dave, who'd been scanning the horizon. Riders, he shouted. Dozens of them. Clara's heart lurched. She set down the water bucket and dashed to the porch. Sure enough, a large band of Comanche warriors, at least 100 strong, stretched across the distant plains, and at their head was a tall man, draped in a cloak of fur, his posture regal and intimidating. Behind him flew several tribal flags, the bright colors fluttering in the wind. Her mouth went dry. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. "There's so many." Dave swallowed hard. "They're coming straight for us." The thunderous approach of the war party sent adrenaline surging through Clara's veins. She instinctively looked for her rifle, then froze, recalling how showing weapons had a way of igniting conflict. Yet ignoring her own safety was unwise. She gripped the Spencer carbine, but kept it lowered, heart hammering. Dave crouched by the barn door with his revolver. Neither of them wanted a fight, but self-preservation was too deeply ingrained in them to stand unarmed. As the warriors drew nearer, they fanned out in a semicircle around the cabin. At the forefront was a man with imposing stature, his long braided hair interwoven with feathers. His face was a map of lines and scars, each telling a history of battle and survival. Everything about him radiated authority. He raised a hand, and the entire war party halted, hooves stomping and snorting in the crisp air. Clara felt Dave tense behind her. She took a trembling step forward, carefully placing the rifle barrel down. Every detail of the moment seared into her mind. The rustle of the Comanche horses, the sharp tang of the winter breeze, the dryness in her throat. The man spoke in a deep, resonant voice in Comanche. Though Clara understood little, she recognized the word for child repeated, and something that sounded like "my son." Slowly realization dawned. This must be the father of the boy she had saved. Summoning every shred of courage, Clara raised her voice to address him. "Your son. I helped him. He was wounded. She stumbled over half-remembered Comanche phrases. "He is alive." The father's eyes flickered. One of the younger warriors galloped forward, spouting a flurry of words in Comanche. Clearly he was explaining or recounting something. The father's gaze never left Clara. After a tense moment, he dismounted. Dave inhaled sharply. Careful, he breathed, though he didn't raise his gun. The father stepped toward Clara. The winter sun cast a metallic glint on the handful of shells strung around his neck. With slow deliberation, he reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out a small beaded bracelet, identical in style to the one his son's rescuer still clutched in her coat pocket. He extended it to Clara. She understood the gesture. Trembling, she retrieved the bracelet given to her by the Comanche leader a few days prior. She held it out, her gaze locked with the man's. For an infinite moment, neither moved. The father's stern face softened just enough to convey gratitude. Then he spoke more words in Comanche, as though reciting a vow. Behind him, the assembled warriors remained wary. Some clutched rifles or bows. The tension was palpable, as though the entire scene hovered on the edge of a knife. Finally, the father pointed to the south, then to Clara, then tapped his chest. She interpreted it as a request he wanted her to come meet his family or see his son. But she wasn't entirely certain. The language barrier loomed like a canyon between them. Dave watched from the doorway. "He's not asking for a fight," Dave muttered. "Looks like he's giving you some kind of invitation." Clara swallowed, adrenaline spiking. She glanced around at the imposing war party. Did she dare leave the safety of her homestead? And yet turning away, this gesture might insult him. She steeled her nerves. Taking a single step forward, she nodded at the father. She didn't speak, merely let her posture reflect willingness. With a sharp whistle, the father signaled. A younger warrior rode up, leading a gentle paint mare by the reins. The father offered them to Clara. Heart in her throat, she cast a look back at Dave. He looked ready to protest, but she silently conveyed her decision with a determined nod. However foolish it might be, she had to see this through. She mounted the mare. The father and several warriors did likewise, while the bulk of the party remained spread out in a watchful ring around the cabin. Dave stood on the porch rifle at his side, worry etched in every line of his face. Clara's stomach churned with apprehension as they set off across the plains, the father leading his fur cloak rippling in the breeze. She forced herself to breathe, to remember that these were parents, siblings and tribespeople concerned about their own. The West had turned them into adversaries by circumstance, but perhaps compassion could bridge the gap. They rode for an hour across gently rolling terrain, through patches of scrub and frozen creeks. The hush of the plains was broken only by the horses' hooves crunching on snow and the faint whistle of the wind. Eventually, Clara spotted smoke tendrils curling into the sky. The Comanche camp came into view, several teepees arranged in a wide circle. Horses grazing on sparse grass near a shallow stream. Men, women, and children moved about their faces, glancing curiously at Clara as she approached. Her escort guided her to a central fire pit, where an older woman draped in blankets was boiling something in a pot. Nearby, on a bed of woven mats, lay the boy she had nursed. At the sight of Clara, he pushed himself up, wincing in pain, but his face broke into a grin. His mother, Clara, assumed hovered protectively surprise etched in her features. The father dismounted, gesturing for Clara to do the same. She slid off, the paint mare, heart pounding. The older woman at the fire rose, speaking softly to the father, who replied in hushed tones. It was a surreal moment, standing in the heart of a Comanche camp, feeling the eyes of an entire band upon her. The boy's mother murmured something to her son. He said a word in Comanche, pointing to Clara, then to his bandaged side. The mother's gaze shifted, brimming with thanks. She lifted her hands to Clara's, pressing them gently in a universal sign of gratitude. Clara's tension melted under the warmth of the gesture. Nearby children peered out from behind teepees, wide-eyed at the sight of a white woman in their midst. A few older men stood with cautious expressions, arms folded across their chests. Despite the mutual unease, there was no immediate hostility. The father turned to Clara. He nodded solemnly, then pointed to the boy. One day, he said in halting English, "He will be strong warrior." His accent was thick, but his intent was clear. Then he touched his own chest. "I am Spotted Eagle." He paused, searching for words. "You save my son." Clara's eyes welled with tears at hearing him speak. She gathered herself. "Clara Whitfield," she replied, tapping her chest. Spotted Eagle nodded. He lifted his chin, addressing his people with a few firm words in Comanche. She caught snatches of "Pyre child" and "good woman." By the respectful hush that followed, she sensed he was telling them of her actions. The mother bowed her head, tears shining in her eyes. The boy stared up at Clara with unabashed admiration. At last, a middle-aged man stepped forward wearing a vest adorned with beads. He spoke fluent English, explaining that he had once worked as a scout for Colonel Ranald S. Mackenzie. "My name is Little Owl," he said softly. "Spotted Eagle thanks you. He says the bullet that hurt his son came from men who attacked the band. His son was lost in the storm, wounded. You found him?" Clara felt her chest tighten. "I'm sorry they were attacked," she said. "I only did what I could." Little Owl nodded. "The boy told us you were kind, gave him food warmth. Spotted Eagle is a war leader among the Noconi Comanche. He came with his warriors, so no one would stand against him taking his son home." A ripple of relief passed through Clara. She had feared they might see her as an enemy. "I'm glad he's safe," she managed. The older woman by the fire ladled some stew into a wooden bowl and offered it to Clara. Though her stomach was tense, she accepted the gesture, taking a careful sip. Warmth blossomed in her chest. She noticed how the entire band seemed to hold its collective breath watching this exchange. Little Owl resumed in a cautious tone. "Spotted Eagle also wants to know. Did you see who attacked him? Were there white soldiers near your cabin?" Clara shook her head. "No. I only found your son lying in the snow. I don't know who shot him." Spotted Eagle listened to the translation, then nodded slowly. He seemed to accept her words. His dark eyes shone with gratitude, mingled with a fierce protectiveness. Clara couldn't help but notice the mother, now gently brushing her son's hair. tears still in her eyes. The entire camp's sorrow and relief hung palpable in the cold air. For the next hour, Clara remained in the camp. She sensed that Spotted Eagle wanted to reassure his people that no threat lingered with her presence. Some women approached, eyes wary, handing her small tokens, a piece of dried meat, a strip of fur. She reciprocated the best she could, offering small items. She carried a silver locket with a cameo of her mother, which she carefully showed and explained, or a bar of soap or hairpins that the Comanche women eyed curiously. Little Owl served as translator, explaining that Spotted Eagle had come with a large party to ensure the boy was not taken captive. They had encountered too many tragedies, children, stolen families, torn apart by raids and counter-raids, but seeing Clara's genuine concern had eased their anger, at least for now. When it was time for her to depart, Spotted Eagle walked her to the waiting mare. He lifted the beaded bracelet from his pouch, again pressing it firmly into her palm. He placed a hand over his heart, then gently patted the mare's neck. Little Owl smiled thinly. "You are safe to ride back, Clara Whitfield. Spotted Eagle says your kindness will not be forgotten. But there is still war in these lands. Not all warriors are so understanding." Clara's throat tightened. She thanked them and mounted, glancing over the camp one last time. The boy waved weakly, a tiny smile on his lips. His mother and father stood side by side, the mother's arm draped protectively around her child. A lump rose in Clara's throat as she recognized the fragile nature of peace here. She kicked the mare into a trot, departing the encampment under the watchful eyes of the Nokone band. On the ride back, Clara's mind whirled. She felt strangely elated having met a Comanche war leader and seen a child she'd saved restored to the warmth of family. Yet she also understood the precariousness of her position. Many settlers would regard her as naive, or worse, a collaborator. The Comanche, for their part, still had plenty of reasons to mistrust the white settlers. A single misunderstanding could shatter the fragile goodwill she'd earned. When she returned to the cabin, Dave rushed out, relief etched across his face. "Thank heavens you're all right," he blurted, nearly dragging her off the horse. "I thought for sure they'd taken you." She gave a tired smile. "They're good people, Dave. They just want to protect their children, same as anyone." Her voice trembled with emotion. "The boy is safe. His parents are grateful." Dave exhaled. That's something, I suppose." He stared at the horizon, brow furrowed. "But we'd best keep our eyes peeled. Not everyone out here sees things the way you do." In the following days, word spread among the scattered ranchers and passers-by. Stories circulated about how that crazy Whitfield woman harbored a wounded Comanche boy and then rode off with a war party. Some called her reckless. Others whispered that she must be a saint or a fool. Henry Salter dropped by, arms loaded with supplies, half expecting to find the place burned to the ground. Instead, he found Clara crocheting near the fire, the beaded bracelet around her wrist. He shook his head in amazement. Yet the winter still stretched on, and with it the trials of living on the frontier. Blizzards came and went. Clara and Dave mended fences, tended cattle, and occasionally glimpsed small Comanche parties in the distance, as though they were silently keeping watch. None approached the cabin again. By early spring, the snows began to melt, and the land transformed from a barren white desert into muddy plains flecked with early wildflowers. With the thaw came movement traders, traveling peddlers, and inevitably the U.S. cavalry. A detachment under Captain James Milford arrived in the region, investigating reports of Comanche raids. They stopped by Clara's ranch one bright morning, A dozen soldiers in blue coats and dusty hats, Miss Whitfield. Captain Milford said stiffly, doffing his hat. We hear you have some experience with the local Comanche recently. Clara tensed, noticing how Dave hovered near the doorway, rifle well within reach. I helped a wounded child captain. He was lost in a blizzard. The captain's gaze flicked to the bracelet. The boy was Comanche. Yes, Clara said simply. Milford exchanged a glance with a subordinate. We have intelligence that a war party of over 100 Comanche was seen here around your place. Care to explain? Clara felt her jaw tighten. They were his people come to take him home. There was no raid, no attack. Captain Milford lifted a brow. You were not harmed, no. She paused, measuring her words carefully. They were grateful I saved the child. The officer snorted. Hard to imagine gratitude from savages. Are you sure they didn't threaten you? Anger flared in Clara's chest. She clenched her fists, biting back a retort. They were no threat, she said, voice low. In fact, they might be more peaceful now because of what happened. Milford's mouth thinned. We'll see about that. If you have any more contact, you're to report it immediately. These plains aren't safe. With that, the soldiers rode off, leaving Clara feeling both affronted and uneasy. She knew the cavalry's presence could stir conflict if they went after Spotted Eagle's band. A single clash, a single misunderstanding, and the tenuous trust she'd built could shatter. Days turned into weeks. Rumors circulated of a large expedition forming at Fort Concho, planning to drive any Comanche not on the reservations deeper into the wilderness or force them to surrender. Clara dreaded what might happen if Spotted Eagle's people were pursued. She confided in Dave, who frowned thoughtfully. I don't know that we can do anything, he said, softly. We're just ranch folks, Clara. She sighed, remembering the boy's hopeful eyes. But maybe we can warn them, she whispered, or at least let them know the cavalry's moving. How Dave asked. She didn't have an immediate answer, but an idea took root in her mind. If the cavalry was forming a punitive expedition, they might first reconnoiter near the old mission ruins by the Brazos River. That was where scouts often launched from. If Clara could slip away and find the Noconi camp, she might warn Spotted Eagle, giving him time to avoid a direct conflict. It was dangerous, perhaps even foolhardy. But every time she thought of that boy's bright, trusting smile, she knew she couldn't stay idle. In early April, with a fresh wind sweeping across the plains, Clara packed a small bag of provisions, saddled her mare, and told Dave she intended to ride out for a short trip. She was sparing him the details to protect him. If she failed or was caught, he wouldn't be implicated in her actions. She rode southeast, following faint trails and landmarks she recalled from her visit to the Noconi camp. The air smelled of damp earth and budding vegetation. Days passed without any sign of Comanche or cavalry. Just when she began to worry she'd never find them, she spotted a thin column of smoke rising beyond a grove of cottonwoods. Her heart pounded. She approached slowly, mindful of potential lookouts. Sure enough, 2 young Comanche men emerged from the brush arrows nocked in their bows. Clara halted, holding up her hands and speaking the few Comanche words she knew. I come in peace. I seek Spotted Eagle. The men eyed her warily until at last Little Owl stepped forward from behind them, relief washing over his features. He recognized her, speaking softly to the guards. They lowered their bows, and Clara exhaled, letting the tension drain from her limbs. She followed Little Owl into a modest camp smaller than before. Many of the teepees were gone, and the atmosphere was tense. The boy she had saved was there, sitting cross-legged, carefully wrapping a piece of hide around his waist. He beamed upon seeing her. Spotted Eagle appeared from a teepee brow furrowed. Little Owl explained Clara's arrival in hushed tones. She dismounted and approached, offering a respectful nod. "I came to warn you," she said, her voice trembling. "The cavalry. They're forming a larger group heading this way. They might attack." Little Owl translated. Spotted Eagle's jaw tightened and a flurry of words tumbled out. He was clearly angry, but Clara could sense it was not directed at her. He seemed exasperated, bitter at the endless cycle of violence. Finally, he pointed east, speaking again in an urgent tone. Little Owl turned to Clara. "He says thank you. The Nokone will move north away from the soldiers, but it is hard to keep running. We are tired." Clara's eyes burned with sympathy. She thought of how Jeremiah once told her the frontier was wide enough for everyone if only people would let each other be. She blinked back tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Spotted Eagle studied her, then placed a hand on her shoulder. With a stiff voice, he said in English, "You, friend of Nokone." He paused, seeking the right word. "We remember." Clara's throat tightened. She dipped her head. "Thank you." A faint smile curved the war leader's lips. He barked a command, and the entire camp burst into motion. People packed their belongings swiftly. Within an hour, the Nokone were on the move, teepees, disassembled horses laden with gear. The boy waved at Clara before following his mother and father into the northern hills. She lingered in the abandoned clearing. The smoldering fire pit was all that remained of the camp. She felt relief knowing they might escape the cavalry's net, mingled with sorrow at the plight of these families. Eventually, she turned her mare southward, heading back to her homestead. A swirl of dust rose behind her, and the stirring wind carried the faint echo of horses' hooves north. For better or worse, she had done what she could. Spring deepened into summer. The cavalry's expedition combed the region, but by then, Spotted Eagle's band had melted away into the canyons and prairies far from the troopers' reach. Clara heard sporadic rumors of battles fought elsewhere, of uneasy truces. But no soldier or rancher laid eyes on Spotted Eagle or his son again. Back at her ranch, Clara continued her quiet life. She milked cows, tended gardens, helped neighbors in times of need. Sometimes, she'd sit on the porch at dusk, fingering the beaded bracelet, recalling a small boy's luminous eyes and the father who arrived with 100 warriors. She wondered if the child remembered the woman who nursed him back from the brink of death. She hoped so. Word of Clara's deed drifted through the territory, becoming something of a legend, a lone widow saving a Comanche boy, single-handedly preventing what could have been a deadly conflict. Folks whispered that she was either touched in the head or touched by an angel. Clara paid them no mind. She knew what mattered. On a cold, stormy night, she'd chosen humanity over fear, and that choice had planted a seed of peace, small though it was in soil stained by years of mistrust. Months later, Dave noticed a new swirl of bright beads adorning the post by the ranch gate, braided into the wood. Neither of them had seen who placed it there, but Clara smiled when she saw the pattern. It was the same style of beadwork, worn by Spotted Eagle and his son. A silent message they remembered her kindness even from afar. She touched the beads gently, feeling a flicker of hope for a land and people who had endured too many tragedies. In the vast tapestry of the frontier, her story was but a single thread, yet it glimmered with a quiet testament to compassion and courage. And in a place where trust was as rare as rain in a drought that was worth far more than gold. And so ends the tale of Clara Whitfield, a widow who found a wounded Comanche child in a furious blizzard and nursed him back to life. When his father arrived with 100 warriors at her humble doorstep, it seemed the entire plains held its breath. But instead of bloodshed, Clara's act of mercy opened a fragile window of understanding in a land defined by distrust. Her story reminds us that a single moment of compassion can ripple outward, bridging divides that once seemed insurmountable. If this true frontier legend speaks to your heart, we invite you to share it far and wide. Like this video to spread the spirit of hope. Comment your thoughts to keep Clara's memory alive. And subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories from the tapestry of history, each one a shining testament to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit.